Welcome to the We Are Film podcast.
I was going to say, one of the things that, and I guess this kind of goes into my first question, one of the things that really kind of blew me away was a lot of your behind the scenes that you were posting on Instagram, actually. And that's where I kind of first saw your stuff, and I was like, oh, wow, like I feel like for some reason a lot of cinematographers or just filmmakers in general kind of will hide some of those things, especially the pre-production side. So I'd love to kind of know more about sort of your process and it could be like the optimal process or, what you did for all the different films you've worked on. And I just love to kind of know what you like to bring to that table and sort of take in as a process.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, let me say thank you for having me, Cameron. I appreciate getting to talk to you. This is awesome. I think to your point about just DPs wanting to hide certain things, I think that I don't really believe in a special sauce kind of attitude. Like everything that we do should be shareable. It should be something that we can, make available to people. And then, the kind of signature parts of your work come from your taste and your style and your approach to things, and the way you think about things and work with people. But so I'm open to sharing as much of that as possible. And I kind of wish there was more of that when I was first starting out. And I've seen a lot more of that recently. It's been really cool to see other cinematographers open up and talk about their process and philosophy and approach to things. So I'm happy to lend to the canon if I can. That's exciting. In terms of my process, it's very specific, and it comes from a place of precision and interest in intentionality. I'm really interested in presenting something that feels very deliberate and feels like a lot of thought went into it. And the only way to get there is to put a lot of thought into it. So it's a ton of prep, and I kind of treat it in phases. And most of that is in prep itself. So the first phase is something that is just getting to know a director, and so much you'll see so much of this process is just getting on the same page as the director. It's putting our two minds in sync and making sure that when we present our vision and go to execute it, it's unified, it's clear, it's well communicated well in advance, so that everybody can be taking the necessary steps. But a lot of that comes from us looking internally first and making sure that we are on the same page and that we are fighting for the best thing for the movie, telling the best story possible. So the first phase is getting to know a director, watching movies together, not necessarily in the same room, but within some sort of short time period where we can then comment on them and talk about them and have those images fresh in our brains. I think that's really important. There might be a movie that you've seen, ages ago, but you have like an image of it, but when you see it with like a week ago, you're like, oh wow, there's like that sequence and it has this particular shot in it. And if we've both seen it, then we can talk about, well, there's that I just see the Dark Knight poster behind you. So like, we just saw the Dark Knight, and there's that shot where he's like walking away from the hospital and it's blown up. And in my head, that was like on Steadicam, but actually it's on sticks, and I don't remember, but something like that. And there's like some kind of subconscious influence that we get by just having it fresh in our brains, and it builds this common film language. And if you're directing something and you have a particular taste and things that you like and things that you don't like, I want to get to know that and hear that from you and see that and be like, well, okay, we didn't like the fact that shot was on sticks. Actually, maybe that wasn't the right choice, and maybe that's not the right choice for our film. But it can be helpful to watch those things and digest those things and say, like, what are we excluding from our film? What are we kind of painting as the boundaries of our visual language? So that's sort of like the first phase of it, this gradual building of ideas in a common language. And then it goes to phase 2, I guess, which is defining those boundaries and really applying the common language that we have to the film at hand and saying, these are the levers we can pull. These are the rules of our game. Maybe it's, a certain part of the film is going to be sweeping camera movement. Maybe a different part of the film is going to be all handheld, and these are the reasons why, because of what's going on in the story. Or it could be just a color movement. We're saying, oh, it's going to be blue at first and go to reds near the end of it. Or it could be lensing, maybe, and it might not need to be throughout. It could be like, well, at this turning point in the film, we're in every scene, we're going to switch to wide lenses. That's, you know, a possibility. And these are all examples from films I've shot, actually, those kinds of rules. I guess defining that and being crystal clear on that really sets an intention before we even get to the nitty gritty of what are going to be the bits and pieces of each scene. And it will guide us as we go through it. Another little North Star guiding thing that I like to establish early in the process is asking a director for one word for a film. And I find that this is a good practice to kind of give us clarity when in doubt, right? And it becomes like the one thing that unifies the whole film. So it's not that it's easy, but it can be easy to just try to make things look good or like, you know, tell whatever the story is at hand. But the harder thing is to make a consistent movie that feels like we are making one movie the whole time, right? So with all that, asking for one word, it can come in handy if you conjure it when you're like, well, do we do A or do we do B? Well, clearly the word is, you know, X, so we got to do A, you know, and that answers the question more often than not. So those are kind of the rules of the game, right? That's like the next phase. Then we get into the nitty gritty, and then it's the shot listing. And the shot listing is the most substantial part of the prep process for me. And that's going to occupy most of the time during formal prep time. And it's I use a spreadsheet that I've kind of been building for years that has, you know, certain little shortcuts in it, I guess, formulas just to make things a little bit easier. But also it's a Google sheet, and it's shared with everybody in the crew, and it's shared from the moment we start it. And I find that this is a really important part of my philosophy, at least, that I'm an open book, and our vision is an open book, and there's the whole film is always a work in progress. So there's no reason in saying that like there's a particular part of it that is a work in progress and can't be shown yet. I like to get that information to people as early as possible in as much detail as possible. So shot list, putting it all together, applying our rules, going through beat by beat through every single scene, and really talking about like, how is that going to cut? How are we going to move the camera from A to B? What's the blocking going to be like? And we'll do a lot of the blocking during that time as well, drawing diagrams and saying like, okay, well, this line, the character is going to walk over here, and we don't have the actors in the room. So it's kind of just me and the director being like, well, I think they would sit when this happens. And I think it's super helpful to have an idea of what you want for the blocking rather than just, you know, waiting to see. Because as with anything, the more prepared you are, the easier it's going to be, and the more confident you come across. There was an AD, the first AD on Barbarian, his name was Toshko. He would say, you guys are so great, we're so prepared, we're so planned, because we're going to come in looking like a bunch of geniuses, and our goal is to just look like a bunch of geniuses, and we don't want to walk away from the day looking like a bunch of lilting flowers. That's the way he put it. We don't want our heads down, we don't want to feel like we've let anybody down. So by planning and showing up with exactly what we want to do, everybody's like, oh, these guys know what they're doing. So that's the shot listing. Then the next step of it is, after we've written this shot list and drawn all these floor plans, we usually do that like kind of in a vacuum in like a, you know, hotel room or something, or in a production office, where it's like you're just imagining what the film could be, and there's no rules about logistics, and there's no requirements from things. And as we're going through this, we're location scouting, and we're starting to understand, well, this is kind of what the location looks like. This is what it offers. This is what it doesn't. But it can also inform the scouting and say, well, we really do want a shot like this. Let's find a location that does that and serves that. Or if you're building a set, you can design it kind of hand in hand. So then we take our shot list and we go and photoboard it. And this is sort of maybe the next step that not a lot of people do. But I do it on every film for every shot in the movie. And we're going to generate a storyboard for the movie. I find it faster than hand drawing or having somebody else hand draw the storyboards. And it's more accurate. It's in the locations. We know exactly what lens we're going to be on. And it takes this kind of theoretical close-up maybe that you and I, the director and I have discussed, that the director is picturing chin up and I'm picturing collarbone up, and that can make all the difference in the world. So until we actually see a picture of it and look at that and say, this is the close-up that we want, that's when it becomes real and it becomes a shot that we can talk about. And we don't want to be having that conversation on set in front of everybody, because that hurts our confidence, hurts our looking like geniuses, and hurts everybody's hurts the time, really. It's just time to spend doing that. So let's have that debate. Let's, be going on about it, but just not in front of everybody when the clock is ticking. So photoboard everything. Then we go shoot the movie. And when we're shooting, it's great because it's like we know exactly what we're doing. We say, hey, actors, go stand here, the camera, here's the shot, go set this up. I'll work on the lighting. The director can work with the actors in the performance, and we're just cranking. And then when things shift and things change, we know exactly what we're looking for because we've already had the conversation about why we're doing it. We know, even if we've talked about a certain camera move that's in a different place in the room, maybe the actors have really are insistent that it's going to be better in a different place in the room, or the light has changed, or the time has changed, whatever it is, we can adapt and say, well, we do need that push in at that moment, so let's get that just over here. Or we're shooting and we get a shot and we're like, we actually don't need X, Y, and Z shot, or oh, we really do need a close-up now and we didn't realize that before. But we know why we need it. We know how it's going to work with our overall vision, and it creates that consistency of vision and the intentionality that I was talking about.
I was going to say, yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. I'm so glad to hear that. I have a million questions loaded inside of that. One of the ones I want to kind of ask you about that is, and I always find fascinating about shot listing and storyboarding is, when you're doing these shot listing storyboards, are you doing it in a sense of like chronological as like the edit of the film, or is it something that you're looking at it completely from like a practical shooting standpoint? Like, oh, we're going to shoot everything this direction, right, and then turn over, whatever it is. Like, I'm always very curious how that balance is of, knowing you may run a long shot or a long take of something that'll probably get edited up, right? But I'm just curious how you kind of look at that.
Yeah, of course, there's coverage and we're aware of it. I think each line in the shot list is an individual camera setup, knowing as we're talking about it, how much it's going to cover of the script, where it's going to start and end, and knowing that there will be other shots to intercut with. But we are thinking of how those shots will intercut or could be intercut to make it work. So that's definitely part of the process.
Yeah, because that's what I always find fascinating about that shot list is it feels like there's there's your creative fun shot list of like, okay, this is how it should feel. And then there's like, once you get to that, okay, now people want to start figuring out how are we setting up, what are we doing based on schedule? So as part of that too, a lot of people that are listening to this podcast are filmmakers. So, you talked about a lot of this, and you said about a Google Sheet. I'm curious about some of the tech you're using, because that was one of the things that jumped out to me. I actually saw that you're using, I think, CAD Rage, right? The app. And I'm always fascinated by what people are using to actually get this stuff done. Can you kind of talk about some of the things that you actually do use, day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely a Google Sheet format, a template that I've created that holds all the shot information, and I think that's really helpful because it can be collaborative. It's a collaborative document. It's live, and as I'm sitting with the director, I'm usually the one typing into the shot list, but the director's right there. They can also look at it on their computer and edit it, and everybody can kind of take a look at it, and the AD can take a look at it. I think the AD is probably the most important person to see the shot list as it's developing, and the production manager is really important because I'm like highlighting what equipment we're going to need and when there will be visual effects and when there will be special effects for every single camera setup. So then that can be easily filtered and sorted and used as data to be like, well, on what days do we need the techno crane? On what days are we going to need haze for special effects? And, oh, we're going to need green screen on this. Let's budget for that and get quotes for, usually VFX is going to ask for a VFX breakdown of some kind. And instead of having to like scratch our heads and be like, okay, what are the VFX shots? It's just a matter of look at the shot list, filter out the VFX shots because they're tagged and be like, there's the breakdown. Those are the shots. So kind of doing that as we go is really helpful. that Google Sheet is kind of the master document for all of that. I will store that with whatever other kind of documents there are in prep, either in a Google Drive, shared Google Drive folder or a Dropbox folder or whatever. But again, something that every department head has access to. And I really try to encourage other department heads to share their information in folders as well, because I want to see what the costume designer is putting together. I want to see what the production designer is putting together. And we all want to see what locations is putting together. So I will go, whenever we're on a location scout, I'll take way too many photos of every location, and I'll try to sort them into folders that make sense about that location. Like, oh, this is the bedroom, this is the kitchen of this house or whatever, and put those in the Google Drive or Dropbox folder, so that everybody has access to it. And then usually when we're scouting and shot listing, we're sitting in the room shot listing. We're like, wait, was that door on the left or the right, or which way did that door open? Is that going to work with the blocking? And we'll be able to bring up the photos. And because I don't take the photos artistically, it's really just like document the space and every single detail of it. I try to take photos of the ceilings because inevitably somebody's going to be like, can we rig something up, whatever. And out the windows, like how high, what floor are we on? How many feet up are we? Is this, light going to be able to reach? So kind of collecting all of that info in as many ways as possible so that we can easily reference it and everybody can reference it. So those are kind of two pieces of tech. And then for the photo boards, I use CAD Rage. I've also used Artemis. I find that CAD Rage has a little bit more of a streamlined interface for taking the photos. But either way, I have to do a lot of manual sorting and organizing of those files afterwards to try to make it a concise photo board that also correlates to the shot list. So I'm really into kind of having this numbering system. Like every scene, we have scene numbers for a reason. Let's use them, right? So just having every shot be a numbered shot within the scene, and then every photo board matched to one of those. There might be multiple frames, and those have like underscores and numbers, and it's all kind of organized in that way, I guess. Oh, yeah.
Well, that's awesome to hear, because that's what I'm always fascinated too. Like the ceiling, that's a great point. Like there was a point where we were shooting a short and we had to do this kind of elaborate move, and we actually 3D scanned using Polycam. The room, and it was that kind of thing. It's like you needed to know how high the ceilings were, and that kind of stuff. I think is sometimes it's underlooked. I think in that scouting previs phase. So it's awesome to hear that, on all scales, right? You're on the big scale, and you're doing these things too. That feel also like good prep, no matter what level. And actually, kind of talking about that, I wanted to go to the Vigil. So I love the Vigil movie. Blew me away the first time I saw it. It wasn't. Kind of had like went in with very little knowledge and expectations.
Cool. Thanks.
And I'm curious, like, what your approach was on that film, because the thing that did really I took away from that was what interesting and it felt like really contrasting visuals from sort of the beginning of the film towards the end of the film. And I'd love to know sort of your approach and some of those things that you were talking about and some ways that you kind of translated that into into film.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I asked Keith, the director, was like, what's the one word for the film? And he thought about it for a minute, and it became decay. Decay was the word that we used. And I love that because it's like an active word and it gives us somewhere to go with it. But it is also death and stillness, and the film is very much about that. So so that became part of our vocabulary throughout it. But some of the visual rules of our game were we really wanted to have the camera always moving until what's the character's name? Yakov gets to the house. And as soon as he steps into the house, the camera stops moving and it's dead. Doesn't mean we can't move the camera after that, but we just want to have, until we get to that point, the camera is moving 100% of the time. And hopefully that gives that house like a stillness and a sense of decay as well. And it sets that house really aside from the rest of the world, which I think is important for for his experience. And then it was defining different colors in different spaces and being aware of how the lights change throughout the film. There was definitely there's like a power outage that spooky power outage thing that happens at a certain point. Eventually the sun comes up near the end, and that looks very different. We were also cautious of like how much haze there is in the house and how that builds throughout the experience, and how the exterior, when he does go outside, really feels very different from the inside of the house. A lot to do with color and the type of light, and how the exterior looks different the first time he's in the house or outside when he comes to the house versus when he goes out in the middle of the film. So a lot of that was lighting and just being aware of those color choices, but all the while staying motivated by some source. So in the kitchen, it's like that fluorescent under the cabinet. In the basement, it's the TV is very blue, and that's the light. In the main room, it's the what do you call it? Just practicals in general. And then the practicals go out, so that changes it. And then there's like the dawn and the candles and like the yellow feeling in the upstairs room. So separating all of those was a big part of it. And then just building suspense and being aware of when the jump scares are, how we're getting there, and then how we pay off the scares. So yeah.
I was going to say, when it comes to, because I think that's something that fascinates me always, is like building a scare and the ways you can do it, right? Where, I mean, you've seen films where it's, it's these really controlled dolly moves, or then it's the handheld, right? What was your kind of philosophy, and maybe it's you and the director right back and forth, obviously, on building those scares and saying like, okay, we're going to build tension and then we're going to, whatever the scare may be, right? What was kind of the thinking in building the tension, in particular the Vigil, that went into some of that camera move and camera work, or even lighting too?
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, one of the things you mentioned was like the handheld feeling, and we were very aware of that and wanted to really limit when we used handheld camera. That was only during the flashback. And then there's one moment where we actually ran out of ton of time and didn't get any shots that we wanted to, which I was just like, oh, let's take the camera and shoot. We have to. But that's a different story, I guess. But I guess knowing that, okay, the camera can only be handheld in the flashback to the brother dying, and when we shot that, it was supposed to be like a little bit like grabbing moments. It should feel very different in that way, and it should also feel very real in some way, where the not flashback part is actually more cinematic or feels a little more surreal in some ways. So that was part of it. Darkness was a big part of being able to do the jump scares and trying to find shadows like just on the edge of too dark to see, and using that to trick the audience into like, did I see something? I'm not sure. And then just straight like doing a quick push in on something as it's jumping out at you is like, oh, it's pretty effective. So I think that was sort of the nature of it, and then figuring out like, okay, if there's going to be a jump scare behind a character, how do we get to the point where we're not showing that so that we can cut to it and reveal it, and we believe that something has snuck up on him, or do like one of those, you pan past an empty thing and then you come back and there's a thing there or something like that. Trying to put those things in there, I think was part of it. Another visual aspect of the film that I kind of failed to mention earlier was the distortion of it all, and we really wanted to mess with Yakov's reality and have him he's doubting his reality throughout the film. So how do we make the audience doubt the reality of it? And that was done through a lot of practical effects and distortions in camera. So I played around with sternos under the lens to create heat waves at certain moments, and that was just sort of warping the image. And then early in the shoot, I found a what do you call it? A casserole dish that was at a church that we were having lunch at, and I was like, I'm taking this, and sorry to that church, I stole your casserole dish, but we used that to great effect. And we gathered a whole bunch of other glass objects, but then I found that one. I was like, this is the one. I still have that casserole dish, but it had like a nice clean curve in it, and I could hang it in front of the lens and manipulate how far into the curve the lens was looking to really exaggerate or distort something more or less, and use that during the shot to do so. And then we were shooting anamorphic and with the Koa anamorphics, and they're very strange. they sort of squeeze on the edges instead of stretching on the edges, especially with the 40 millimeter. So we used that for some kind of carefully planned pans across the room and putting Yakov all the way to the edge of the frame where he feels like trapped and squeezed. And then I even took out there's like one shot where I took out the pin that holds the lens in the right orientation and just rotated it during the shot, because I realized that anamorphic lenses, if you put them on the wrong way, it looks weird. So what if I just turn it during the shot? What would that look like? And we did that for one of the jump scares. It's like at the top of the stairs when he's coming back, he sees the Mazik and it's like, whoa, and jumps out of it. So yeah, things like that, I guess, sort of added to it to create a sense of distortion and warped reality.
I was going to ask you, that's a great point too, with like that kind of experimentation on set, because I always find that fascinating, you know, as a director and doing this obviously on a much smaller scale. But, you know, I always find that there's those times where you find things on set, or there's that moment where you're like, wow, this is magic, right? How is balancing this like really well-planned schedule and shot list, and then having those moments for, you know, like, oh, the aha kind of moments, right? Like, how often do those happen, and how do you kind of work them in without, you know, taking away from all the prep that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, all of those effects were planned and tested. Like I said, I brought a bunch of glass objects, and then none of them were quite working exactly as I wanted, and I found that on set, and then used that, maybe the next day even. But there was room for experimentation because Keith opened us up for it. He was like very welcome to like, oh, that's a cool idea, let's go with that. But it was so much easier to just say, well, we have a plan, we're going to execute our plan. And I really think it's of the films that I've shot, the one that stuck most to the shot list and to the photo boards, and in the edit is almost exactly the way that we thought the edit would turn out. Like, I had no surprises in the edit, and I'm kind of excited about that. Like, it's fun to be surprised in the edit, but in this case it was like, wow, we like shot it and it's edited and that's exactly the thing, and there it is. Like, and the editor had a great time editing it. I remember him talking about being like, oh, it's just put the pieces together, there it is. So I don't know, I mean, the experimentation was mostly in the effects of it and the lighting things, and trying to just fine-tune the details of it. There weren't a lot of moments where we had to pivot, but you know, kind of made it work. And
no, I mean, that's so great. I mean, that's awesome. Right? Like, that's like the peak of, you know, you've got it right. You had it all planned and it worked exactly the way you wanted it to.
Exactly. I will say, like, in general, aside from that film, you know, because I have planned on other films and there have been moments of pivot, because we did the planning, it's like, oh, I know how to pivot that will stay within our vision. And that could be the actor wanting to do different blocking. It could be the lighting is different. It could be, you know, we just realized we screwed up the plan. You know, oh, it doesn't actually work the way we thought it was going to. Yeah.
Now, kind of switching to Barbarian, obviously, because I think one thing that fascinated me, and I mean, probably in everyone who watched the movie, right? It takes some big swings and some really like big movements. And I'm curious, for you as a DP, what were sort of those approach to obviously the different tones, and, you know, especially that they're moving in and out of those different tones. I find that really fascinating, where as a DP, that's probably got to be hard to balance, not only schedule, but tone and like that visual language. So I'm kind of curious, like, what your approach was, and how you and Zach, we'll say other Zach, also, you know, kind of balanced that and created that.
Yeah, I mean, it was it was the same process that I was just talking about, and that film also turned out very similar to the way we planned it. And it was cool because we were able to revise our vision multiple times. I felt like as we were shot listing, we had really productive debate where we were trying to just come up with the best possible ideas and challenging each other in a really nice way. To say like, well, that's a cool idea, but like, what if we level it up in this way? Or that's not a great idea, here's a different one, you know, here's how this would work. And we both did that to each other to the point where the shot list really felt like it came from both of us equally. And then when we went and photoboarded it, we had an opportunity to do another revision. It wasn't so much rote, like we're just shooting the boards of the shot list we created. We realized as we were boarding, oh, there are things that need to be different, because we were seeing the set, and the set was being built as we were shot listing. So it's like, oh, maybe this actually works better in this way, or something like that. Or we would shoot the photo boards, and then Zach would sit with it overnight, and the next day be like, you know, actually looking at these, like, I don't think these cut that well. Let's change this. Then we'd go back and shoot the boards again. and revise the shot list accordingly. So that was sort of a cool developing process where everything was kind of back and forth between what was real and what was in our heads, and until we actually got to shoot it. And then in terms of like balancing the different tones, it was just a matter of setting that intention and going ham with it and saying, we want these to be big swings of contrast and tone, and how are we going to visually set these things apart dramatically differently? That was in the aspect ratio in certain moments. It was in the camera language in certain moments, and it was in the color and the lighting in other moments. So I think one of the challenges with all that is creating the big contrast within one location, right? So much of the film takes place at that one house, and there's the sequence where Justin's character is tape measuring like through the basement, right? And he's going through all of the exact same steps that Tess went through, Georgina's character went through, earlier in the film. But we don't want the audience to just be like, oh, it feels the same. That's boring. Like, we want them to have a different experience of the same exact thing, and go through that same sequence. And then they can recall that, oh, I remember when this was scary. Now this is hilarious, because we have a whole different thing. And that's in the script. And the script is so good. It really diversifying that tone and pivoting, but it also laid the groundwork for the visuals, and then we said, okay, we're gonna double down on that and make these shots feel humorous, and whether that's wider lenses or emphasizing something slightly different with the tape measure and tracking his progress, or when she's going down the stairs, it's handheld, and when he's going down the stairs, it's not, and that sort of dichotomy there was helpful.
I would say, was there any big takeaways from working on something like Barbarian? Obviously, a pretty huge project. Just, I'm always curious. Like, I feel like every time I do a project, I learn something new, or either whether it's a new technique or like a new idea or just way to look at something. Was there something that you kind of took away from Barbarian as like, oh, this is a great learning experience for XYZ?
A million things. Always be learning is my mantra, ABL. So I really am constantly learning on any project, and Barbarian was no exception for sure. I think the bigger things that were new to me were working mostly in a stage with a constructed set, and then also the exteriors were constructed sets. So having influence in how that would be laid out and trying to work with the production designer to make that as real as possible feeling, because I was so afraid of it feeling like a set. Like, if we're gonna do this, I really don't want it to feel like a set, and that was my main intention. And for Zach, it was, he had very specific ideas of blocking that had to work out in a scene to make something have the right emotional beat. As she, like, there was the part where she's coming from the shower and like finds Bill's character in the kitchen. It was very important to him that she has to pass him to get from the bathroom to the bedroom door, right? So that was a key factor of laying out that set and making it all work. So like having the design influence there was exciting and new for me, and scary, because I was like, I don't want to fuck it up. And on a technical level, it was talking about like the ceilings. The ceilings were a huge point of contention for a while, and trying to figure out, A, should there be ceilings? B, what should they be made of? What color should they be? How big can they be if we do it in parts? And I feel like I read an American Cinematographer article about what's the movie? Jackie, which had soft ceilings, and the way they do that is muslin that's painted white on the inside, and you put light through the top to make like soft ambience, or you turn it off and you can look at the ceiling and it looks like a ceiling. So that's kind of the best of both worlds, with being able to light from above and have a practical ceiling. But I had never done that, and I asked around to some friends, and they were like, I don't really know what that is. So I don't know, we like tested it a little bit. We took like a 4x4 piece of muslin and painted it and tried it. And I was like, I think this is going to work. And did that just in the bedroom of the set. So that was a cool, like, technical thing that we discovered. I didn't discover it, but, took from something else. So
No, that's fascinating. I'll say I'd never heard of that, and I feel like that's such one of those things. Yeah, I mean, there's that pre-planning, right? Like if you know you're going to look up at the ceiling, or you're going to be on some wide lens, you're like, well, I got to see that ceiling. But at the same time, it's what does that create for, a whole other department, right? Like because obviously it's like their problems become your problems, so your problems become their problems, right?
absolutely.
And I was going to say, so another thing too is, so now, and I don't believe this is out. Correct me if I'm wrong. The project with Anna Kendrick, right? That is not out yet.
Yeah, so that just got just premiered at TIFF like last
Okay,
week.
that's to say.
Yeah, it's called Woman of the Hour. I'm very excited.
I was going to say, so in talking, one thing I was realizing, kind of making all these connections, is that you've now worked with two substantial, talent, right? Like acting, also now directing, right? Zach is a part of that. I was actually a Wes Kid fan back in the day, and then obviously Anna Kendrick. So I'm really curious, like what that is like, and sort of what that relationship is like, having a director who not only knows the camera side of it, but also being on the flip side of that. I'm kind of curious, if there's anything that you kind of picked up as a DP, or just anything new in that experience.
Yeah, I mean, both of them were amazingly influential to me, but also shocking to like watch them work with actors. It's so cool when they like do their thing, and the insights that they have that like I just so beyond me. So I just remember like Zach being able to like go through a scene, and I would see it rehearsed, and he would immediately know like not even like a direction, but just like a suggestion to one actor that would take it in a totally different direction, and something else to a different actor, and knowing like, oh, this is what that actor needs, and that's different from what this actor needs. I thought that was amazing. And then like seeing that change, like as we're rehearsing it goes from like, okay, like that was fine, like it was a good scene, to like, whoa, okay, like now there's levels to it, and like I see all the different stuff, and it's things that I didn't read in the script and I just like missed for some reason, but he was able to bring out. And Anna was the same way, and she had like such an ability to see and predict how the audience is going to react to something, and also to empathize with the actor's experience of the shoot itself. I was so blown away with them when she said things like, she had a great commentary on like when you do a little push in on a moment. To me, I was just like, yeah, we're pushing in, like that's the building tension or whatever the thing is. But from the actor's perspective, they didn't know that's coming, so it's a little like, oh, this is the moment that counts, like, oh, okay, and it clues them off to that. So I wasn't aware of that, and she pointed that out, and I was like, oh, okay, like that's such an interesting perspective shift on that experience. And she was very good at like taking care of the actors, making sure that their needs were met, both creatively and physically, and making sure that they had all the information they needed, and just let them do some amazing work. And then she was also performing in it, and it was fantastic to see her switching from performing to directing, and I don't know how she was able to do that, and I'm blown away by that. Just her coming back to the monitor. We would mostly do playback when she was performing, and I think that was necessary and really good that we did that. But it was amazing to see her like have camera notes after performing in a scene. Like I don't know how that goes really. So I don't know. Mostly I was just impressed by both of them, and excited to like hear and see the insight that they brought to things that I didn't see.
No, that's super fascinating. That's like the push in, right? That's something exactly like you wouldn't think of, but it's so cool to hear stuff like that, because I do think it's interesting hearing other perspectives, right, from different people, different creatives, and that kind of like, oh, you're influencing something that, yeah, like you could have thought, oh, this is just a push in, right, or it has this other meaning, and now it has a different meaning. So it's always fascinating to me when people either kind of transcend their maybe what they started as, or something like that. So, and actually, so in your case, I want to kind of go back and dive into how you sort of became a cinematographer, how you got into this, and this whole world in general.
Sure, yeah. How long do you want this story to be?
Well, I'll take all of it. I'm always very curious, because again, I think it always influences people's kind of how they look at things.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I had always had an interest in visuals and sequential storytelling. I've told this story of my dad and I used to play ping pong, and when I was like maybe 4 years old or something, I missed the ball. It went somewhere and bounced away. And he was like, Zach, where did the ball go? And instead of saying the ball's over there, I said, well, Dad, it like bounced off the table and then it went over here and it bounced to this way and it rolled that way and bounced off this and now it's over there. And like kind of told him the whole sequence of it. And years later, he was like, and that's when I knew you were interested in sequencing. Like, oh, crazy. And he thought maybe I'd be an editor or something like that because of it. But I love graphic novels, and for that reason, and just sequential imaging. I somehow, I don't know if it ticks my brain in a good way. But from there, it was like, oh, I picked up his camcorder, that he was using for like home videos, and I was shooting skate videos with friends. And I had some friends who wanted to get into skateboarding, and I was terrible at skateboarding, but I was good at filming them. So I was like, oh, I can still be friends with them if I do this. And once I got to editing that, I was like, well, this is mind blowing. And you put music to it and everything, and iMovie that you can do. It's crazy. And then it was like, maybe before that, I was interested in being a magician. I really was excited about the tricking and like kind of the behind the scenes, like knowing how something works so that the effect is something else for somebody watching. And all of that to me is like, this is all cinematography, but all after the fact. So I had, interests like those. I was interested in woodworking, and I still do a lot of woodworking today. And there's a lot of precision in that, and planning and making. I just like making things. So all of that kind of contributed to like, I want to make movies, right? And when you want to make movies, you don't really know what a cinematographer is, but I was like, I want to make movies. So I went to film school, did like before that, did like a summer program for high school kids to be like, do I like making movies enough for it to be the thing that I do? Because there were all these other options. And that was a good test of the waters. And I realized, oh, these are my people. This is like exactly the thing I want to be doing. So got to film school, just kept making movies, worked on everything I possibly could, said yes to everything, crewed a lot, and thought I wanted to direct, and then tried directing and was like, oh, I don't like that. Working with actors was not my jam. I don't have the insight and the nuance that Zach and Anna have. And I just liked the visuals of it and telling a visual story. So that made me realize, oh, there's a cinematographer. That's a cool job. It's technical. I like technical things, but it's also this like storytelling position, and it's collaborative. And I like taking somebody else's idea and making it better. And I'm not so great at being like, here's my idea, So with that and realizing this is the role that I want to take on, I went, dove into it. I crewed for a while after school. I was a camera assistant, gaffer, key grip, kind of did it all, mostly camera assistant. And at a certain point, I was like, okay, I need to just be a DP now. I had shot, a lot of things on the side, but I wanted to take it from being on the side to right in front of me. So gave up ACing, lost a lot of money, but lost a lot of work, and got really lucky, shot a couple of features, and it took off from there. So, yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I love the magic connection. I feel like so many filmmakers I've met loved magic. Like I was the same way as a kid. I loved magic. And it was like, I don't know if I actually like the magic, but it was the behind the scenes part. Like, oh, how'd they do that trick? Or like, but I feel like too, it's like, that's kind of what filmmaking is, right? It's always a magic trick of like, what's just off camera doesn't exist. So you only have to make sure that it's whatever people can see that makes sense, right? Or that matters.
Exactly. And I'm sure it's no accident that the Magic Castle is across the street from the ASC Clubhouse.
I love that. So were there any movies like during all this time, whether it's in film school or when you're younger, that kind of inspired you? Like, is there anything that really stood out to you that maybe you really started to pay attention to the visuals, or you were really blown away by? Because I think that, those few movies that kind of like always stick with you are the ones that kind of, they're just always there. Like I find that there's movies that I love that are embedded in me that I don't even notice that I reference them in some shape or form. Like, are there those movies for you?
Yeah. For me, the Truman Show is kind of my touchstone of like movies that really affected me. I saw that when I was a kid in theaters, and it's like one of the only movies that I've seen that really had the potential to affect my worldview. I was like, oh, wait a second, hold on. This could all be fake? You guys sure about that? You know? So having that experience by watching a movie was mind-blowing. And I was like, oh, that's so cool that just seeing something in a cinema can change your perspective on the entire world. So that was probably the earliest thing. And then I had a good friend who was really into watching, you know, art house movies or whatever he could get his hand on from, like Criterion Collection. And he was the film reviewer at our high school. So, you know, he saw a lot. I was a good friend of his, and we he showed me a lot of cool movies. Like, I remember seeing Requiem for a Dream in his basement and being like, I'm too young to see this one, but cool. There was like a horror movie called High Tension or Haute Tension, which was fantastic. And that really scared the shit out of me. There was, I don't know, No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood coming out, you know, back to back, and seeing those in a theater and being like, whoa, like this is a whole other level of visual storytelling. Yeah, that, I don't know if those are, I guess, some of the things that come to mind.
And I would say I'm always fascinated by graphic novels, especially if you're a graphic novel guy. What are there any like art styles or any graphic novels that you think are like have either inspired you or that you just love? Because I just feel like I never hear enough good things about graphic novels.
Absolutely. There's an author named Hannah Berry who did some really cool like noir style things. I forget the name of there's one called Britain and Brutally, I think is the name of the book. And it's just like a noir private investigator thing, but I love the visual style of it. She's also done a sort of like horror-y, like train night thing. I can't remember the name of it. It was a while ago I read these things, but I've used those as references for sure, and like bring them into a lookbook. Matt Kintz does some great work. I like his art a lot. And Adam Teen is the name of Hannah Berry's like horror thing. That was cool. And growing up, I really liked Jules Pfeiffer and his art style. It's like very sketch line kind of drawings. And he did the illustrations for Phantom Tollbooth, which I love, but also a book called A Barrel of Laughs, A Veil of Tears, which is my favorite book. So love that.
I'll have to check those out. Yeah, I'm always like interested in finding new graphic novels because I think it's fun to like. I love ones that really can push the art style and do something different and feel kind of fresh and new. So I'll have to check those out. They'll be added to my list.
Yeah.
So I'm curious for you, like, are there, because a lot of people that are listening are cinematographers, a lot of cinematographers in particular, or just filmmakers in general. What are some tips that jump out to you? And in particular, is there anything that jumps out to you that are, simple things? I've recently been kind of a lot on the idea of like simplicity is almost 99% of the time better. And I'm always just curious, like, are there things that, obviously you've done this at a huge scale, are there things that you kind of would say to younger filmmakers making films or younger cinematographers?
I think that when I'm lighting a scene, I will usually try to turn off the lights and then turn them on one by one and make sure that each one is doing what I want it to do and not more than what I want it to do. So that will often show like, okay, well, that's filling in the shadows here and I actually don't want that, or that's spilling here and I don't want that. So like shaping light, that's really helpful. Also part of that is standing where the subject is and looking around at the lighting from the subject's perspective. And you can usually then see like, well, what's keying me right now? Like I'm sitting here and I see like, what's the brightest thing in my view right now? And I know that there's some light hitting off of the windowsill to my right. That's probably going to be pretty dominant right now. And I've got this like shaded light window in front of me. So those are things. But I also see like my dog is sitting in the sun over here and her fur is partially white. And that's very bright. And actually that's the brightest thing in my view to my left. So the light that's hitting me is actually her paws, bouncing the sun because she's sitting in like a sunspot right now. I'll just show you. I know our audience can't see, but I don't know if you can see. But she's over there. Anyway, just like using the subject's perspective to be aware of all of the light in the space is really helpful. That's maybe a good lighting tip and trick.
That's an awesome tip because I've never thought about that. But yeah, right. I feel like there's a lot of times, I do a lot of commercial work too. And it's a lot of times you're on set and you're like, why is something look weird or something seems off? And it's like until you notice, oh, this is bouncing off this table and it's underlighting them or something that you just can't really tell until you're there.
Exactly. And then in terms of like philosophy, I want to either say something like, the story is king, like really just keep the story in mind and what the emotional intention of every moment is, and don't get caught up in like I want it to look good, right? It just needs to look right for the story. That's the most important thing. And then, but also I think so much of it is about communication and collaboration and, how do I consolidate that into a tip and trick? I don't know. Like,
well, I think that's great. And I was going to say too, when you said the one word, I think that is awesome. Yeah, like I've never heard anyone say that, and I feel like that's something that comes up pretty often, and even just like on the small shorts that I've done, where you'll get in a discussion maybe or something doesn't go right, and you're on set, and it's okay, well, what do we do? And right, I love that idea of having that, like, you said Decay, where it's like, if you know that's your North Star in tone and look and everything, well, then you can always make the decision based on that, not just like, I don't know, like, let's, whatever works or something like that. So I think that one blew my mind. So
cool. I like that. I'll say I can't take credit for it. I stole it from somebody, but I actually don't know who I stole it from. I heard another podcast or another interview with a DP, and I was like, that's a cool idea. I like that. So,
well, it's yours now.
And maybe the tip and trick is actually steal everything. Maybe that's the tip, right? Like,
what's the
don't worry about trying to like, make everything your own. Just like take somebody's ideas. Like there's no copyright on imagery when you're recreating it. So go ahead.
Is there some place that, people should, where you want people to follow you, find you, kind of what's the call to action? What do you want them to do for you?
Hire me. I would say, well, I've got a movie that I just shot called Don't Move that is hopefully coming out maybe next year, and Woman of the Hour, which just had its premiere at TIFF. So hopefully check out Woman of the Hour. Netflix bought it. I don't know if it'll be in theaters yet, but hopefully it is. And I'd love for everybody to see that film when it comes out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Cameron. This was awesome. Great to chat with you.
We Are Film. The We Are Film podcast is brought to you by the Black Mountain Visuals Podcast Network.